our next pilot project, which is slightly different given that it is not driven by a developer per se. Excuse me. It is a public funded project, which by and large we're going to avoid. But this one, the Agile Aging Alliance is a partner in. It's called Shapes. It's 24 million euros, a project over 4 years. We're just completed our first year. I'm going to turn to Mac McLaughlin, who is the lead on the project. With all of our speakers, if you've got the agenda, which I sent out, there is a link so you can read more about them. And if you don't, then you will find it on the website and you can find out more. But Max, the person, frankly, dreamt up this Shapes project, which is incredible. He spoke at our Neighbourhoods of the Future Congress 2 years ago about the vision for this project, and then pretty much pulled the whole thing together, which is incredible given there's 43 odd partners. Without further ado, can I introduce you to Mac, who I guess at this point in time is somewhere north of Maynooth in Ireland. Mac.
Yeah. Good morning, or afternoon or evening to people, depending where they're listening from. And thank you very much, Ian. So we moved from 8,000 plus islands to one island, but then I'll also be introducing my colleague Sonia in Germany and Everjan in Italy. We'll each talk for a few moments. So it's a great pleasure to be part of this meeting. And I know that you were reflecting on missing the sort of coming together, the gathering context, but I think actually that we have, the right people. We have the right time in that there's a real excitement around the digital bounce and digital literacy as a result partly of COVID. But I think we're also in the right place. And I think it's actually really nice and very appropriate that we're talking about neighborhoods of the future from our homes. That's actually exactly where we should be talking about them from. And maybe that sort of anticipates something of the future. But I would like to pick one bone with you, Ian. I completely disagree with the idea of going big or going home, because it's both. We must think big, but we mustn't also construct home as though it's a lack of doing something. And I think within the discourse around this area, there is, of course, the sort of ambitious and sometimes quite macho discourse about going big. But equally important is to remember that home for many people is a warm, loving, supportive, and indeed humble type of environment. So I don't like the juxtapositioning of bigness versus home. I think we need to do both of these together. So sorry for giving out at the beginning, but can I have the next slide, please, Nell? Okay, so, and we can go on to the one after that. Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you, really introduce you to a innovation action. So innovation action is sort of Euro speak for what do we need to do to make things work now? So, and by now, I mean that what we're doing is we're taking a lot of existing technologies, and the question is, how do all of those things come together and actually make a meaningful difference to people's lives? So we intend to build, pilot, and deploy a large-scale EU standardized open platform. Open in the sense that anyone can use the platform for free. And so we want to bring together a range of technological, organizational, clinical, educational, and societal solutions. And we're particularly interested in high quality standard of life. And we believe that even people who have a number of physical or indeed mental conditions can still have a very good quality of life. So on the right hand side here, I have a couple of, if you like, headlines. So the Shapes Digital Solutions involves a whole range of things from assistive robots to sensors, wearables, the Internet of Things, but also includes increasingly connected assistive technologies like walking sticks, wheelchairs, and so on. And the ecosystem, I think Ian used a really nice analogy of digital plumbing, that we need a system that can support all of these amazing and wonderful different technologies, but something that also promotes and indeed requires a level of interoperability that doesn't exist at the moment. And in terms of the Shapes marketplace, we need to recognize that so both the fantastic work that ISO does, you know, there are interests in ISO as an independent organization, which of course needs to make a buck. There are interests in Maynooth University, which needs to make research income. And there's interests in AAA, which also needs to survive. So you know, no matter how we like to make ourselves independent, there are also sort of exigencies that we need to respond to. So there's a marketplace of what you might think of as the conventional small and medium enterprise producing great technologies, but it's important to recognize that the marketplace is much stronger than that and much broader than that. So we're going to come up with recommendations that provide guidelines, a sort of roadmap in terms of setting priorities regarding standardization. And that's why this meeting is so terrific for us. We're going to look at a whole range of EU stakeholders and consider how do we scale up, how do we achieve large-scale deployment of the sort of solutions that we're going to suggest. Next, please. So this gives you a sense of some of our partners in this project. There are actually 36 partners in the project, and you can see here that going on 40+% of them are small and medium enterprises, and then there's universities, but there's also large-scale industry, research organizations, non-governmental and public sector organizations. And so we're very keen to include not just a large number, but also a good range of organizations. And one which I think is down at the bottom there, you might not actually be able to see it on that screenshot, but is the World Federation for the Deaf Blind, which is based in, thank you, which is based in Norway. And what we've done in developing this consortium is try to include a range of people who really test out the veracity of our solutions in terms of whether they really improve the quality of life for the people who perhaps most need that. So a lot of our solutions are communication related. So how do they work for people who are deaf and blind, for instance? That's just one example, lots of other examples that we're trying to address as well. Next slide, please now. I'm just going to, for the sake of time, look at the panel on the right-hand side. So expected impacts. So European-led platform, increased competitiveness of the European ICT industry, interoperability, of course, being a key aspect of that. But we're also going to be looking at financial models and scalable markets. So looking for synergies between different member states, and we want to improve the evidence base in terms of the health and care system. And I'll say a little bit more about that, because I think that's sometimes oversold what we mean by evidence base. I'll come to that in a moment. Want to improve quality of life and health for those involved, of course. And then really critical, the user-centeredness and validated and innovative solutions, not because we think they look good or they do clever things, but they're validated in terms of really making a difference to people's quality of life. Next, please. So if you excuse the pun here, a few sort of take homes, we're going to describe to you the overall approach. But in summary, we start from the life world of older people. And a lot of our work around that has been done by anthropologists and behavioral scientists. So we want to know, how do people actually want to live? We don't want to go rushing in with solutions, but to find out the sort of homes that people want, the sort of communities people want. And then what sort of eco-culture needs to exist to support that sort of good living. And that sort of eco-culture, that may indeed be to do with geography and the natural environment. It's to do with the digital plumbing. It's to do with the availability of support from health and social care workers and so on. And crucial for us, technology does not provide solutions. I get exasperated when I hear about engineers developing solutions. They don't have the solutions. That the way in which people use technology, and if it enriches and supports them, then that provides solutions, but it may not. Technology may not be the solution. And indeed, it may be sometimes a distancing mechanism. So people live in interacting systems, social, clinical, technical, legal, and often research tries to simplify, zooms in on one small area to try and get a more depth understanding of that one area. But of course, the reality is when we're implementing services, when we're building homes and communities, there's a wonderful messiness. So I would really appeal for systematic, wonderfully messy research that embraces the reality of the complexity of people's lives and doesn't overly simplify it. And then finally, never stop co-designing vision. I think perhaps for my generation in particular, we've grown up with an idea of you do something and then you get there and you've achieved it. And I think in the perhaps younger generations, there's much more acceptance that it's not about getting anywhere, it's about a continual process of co-designing with the users of the services, etc. So next, please. So I'll hand over to my colleague Sonia, who will be speaking to you in Germany, and is in fact the one who's overseeing the implementation of all our pilot projects. So over to you, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I would like to use the next minutes to give you a short overview about the SHAPES pilot campaign. So what is the SHAPES pilot campaign? Well, it is meant to be a validation of all the different SHAPES digital tools integrated into our platform, and most importantly also to see if this platform has a real positive impact on its users. There will be 450 older persons participating in this pilot campaign in 14 different pilot sites in 10 different countries in the European Union, and since January also outside the European Union. And a part of these older persons themselves, there will be also the family members and the informal caregivers and also the health and care provider in general who will participate in this pilot campaign. If we also count the preparatory activities like all the in-depth interviews we have done and the questionnaires and mock-up test and prototype test to adjust this pilot exactly to the needs of the pilot sites, and we can say that around 2,000 persons overall will participate in the SHAPES real life tests. The next slide, please. Thank you. So what really do we want to test during the pilots? As Mac already said, there's a broad bandwidth of digital solutions which we have inside SHAPES, ranging from smart home applications to virtual assistants to robotics. And this gives us the opportunity to meet several different needs of older persons. This is what we have done. We have created 24 use cases to address 24 different needs of older persons in Europe. To give you some examples, for example, we have the remote health and well-being monitoring use case. This means that we can use a combination of health and fitness trackers, health sensors, and also smart home applications to detect if the older person is in a high-risk situation. In this case, we can raise an alarm, for example, to an emergency responder. This is also quite useful at the moment in the pandemic because we can use this application to treat these persons with chronic diseases remotely. And perhaps later in this year, when the older persons once again are able to travel abroad, we can also use this application to treat the person with the usual caregiver remotely from back home. Then we've got digital tools which is quite popular within Shapes. These are the virtual assistants, and these digital assistants can give reminders to the older persons to take their medication, for example, or to go to an appointment. They can also set up a video call with family members or with informal caregivers, and they can also be used to inform the older person about community activities. This is quite helpful if you want to connect the older person more to their neighborhood. We also have use cases which are addressed to specific sufferings. For example, we have several rehabilitation techniques, and with these techniques we can train, for example, the orofacial musculature after a stroke or the gait of a person after an accident or surgery. There are other use cases for specific settings, for example, in a nursing home, and there we will use a robot to see if they can do the night surveillance. If a person gets up and leaves the bedroom, then the robot can address these persons and start a video call to an informal caregiver, or they can just raise an alarm if necessary. In other use cases, we address older persons with cognitive impairments or even with early stages of dementia. Here we have several applications which are games or which are cognitive training applications, so that these persons are involved in mental exercises. We also have training and support for informal caregivers, which might be family members of persons with dementia, so that they can learn how to deal with this specific psychological and also emotional impact of these diseases on the family members. Other use cases are for persons with hearing and with visual impairments, and there we've got application which can help them to facilitate, for example, if they want to plan or actually do an exercise or go to a shopping center or to a leisure activity. Next slide, please. How do we plan such a big pilot campaign? Well, our Shapes project has 3 different bases. The first one are the technical solutions, which are offered and adapted and also integrated by the Shapes technical partners. Then we also have the Shapes social scientists, anthropologists, and psychologists, which have done a lot of in-depth interviews, not only with the older persons, but also with experts. And with all this information, they have created the 8 Shapes personas, which are somehow a summary of all the different life contexts and also needs of the older persons in Europe. And the user stories of these personas, together with the specific needs of the pilot site, were then used to create 24 use cases. This is basically where we are now. We are working on the key performance indicators, the user requirements of all these use cases, and then also we will work on mock-up and prototype testing, hands-on training for these older persons. Then hopefully in autumn, when the pandemic hopefully helps us, we will start with a real-life testing of the pilots. So next I will hand over to my colleague Eva Jan, who will lead you through the post-pilot phase. Thank you.
Yes, good morning everybody. So I'm talking to you from Italy, where I work for the We Care More Center for Research and Innovation from AES Bologna, which is an end-user driven organization. Our expertise is mainly in assistive technology and disability, but more recently we're also working a lot on the topics related to technology in the aging society. And we are part of this SHAPE project, and we are one of the pilot sites. So many of the technologies that Sonia has just described you, including the overall platform, will be tested by us. And it will have to, of course, to interact in sort of an ecosystem that we are building since a couple of years. So the interoperability issues are, as you can imagine, quite relevant. We are, since a couple of years, trying to reflect and to build solutions or systems that can actually facilitate the independent living of older people, and also their being integrated in the community, of course. And we take into account different domains, health and care, but also the social domain, so the contact, social connectedness with friends and families, but also environmental factors. That's one of the areas that we work a lot on, not only inside home, so smart home technologies, but also outside, connection with what's going on in the community. Using different technologies like digital health technologies, Internet of Things, domotics, but also apps for social connectedness. So we will bring Shapes, the Shapes platform and the digital solutions into this existing work. Next slide, please. As part of our contributions to Shapes, together with other partners, we looked closer into the technology adoption process. And we did that by investigating existing experiences of organizations that have successfully included technological solutions or systems that are basically enhancing or enabling integrated care. Where then integrated care is, of course, related not only to the well-being of people, but also to the capacity of different actors in the ecosystem, the care ecosystem, to connect with each other and together support the person in the best possible way. From those 13 experiences from different countries in Europe, we have identified more than 200 different factors that have to be taken into account when an organization, or let's say an existing care ecosystem, wants to majorly adopt technology in making their processes more effective and more efficient. And we've clustered those in different areas: conceptualization, contextualization, implementation, and evaluation and consolidation, as a sort of let's say design process which is never ending, but continuously looking into how to improve, to scale up, or to transfer solutions to other contexts or other regions. Next slide, please. From those factors, we have identified core sets of core items in those different stages of technology adoption. And I have highlighted here on the slides a few of them that I think are particularly relevant for the work that we're doing today and for the process of standardization. First of all, that when technology comes into complex environments, of course, it has to respond to the needs of the target users, but it also has to, when we're talking about caring communities, reflects the values of integrated care. It has to be compatible with existing care pathways, but also be able to allow the development of new care pathways. It, of course, need to be compatible with the environments, the built environments, but also the social environment, and especially that multi-generational aspect, I think, is very, very interesting. Also, the environments, cultural environments of groups that maybe have different lifestyles in the community, and then more related to the importance of being able to scale up from, let's say, a small area, maybe a housing block, to a larger neighborhood. It should be able to cope with large numbers of users, and then interoperable with different care contexts and cultures, which would facilitate the transfer of this kind of enabling technology to actually make a contribution to a bigger audience. Thank you for that. I'm handing over back to Mac, who will finalize this presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Everett Chan, and thanks, Sonia. Just again, it's a great pleasure for the Shapes project, to which Ian makes a really important contribution to be part of this forum. This forum, I guess, it reflects the sort of panache and vision that I've come to associate with Ian. So no pressure, but we do have, you know, great expectations of it. And I wanted just to conclude with three perspectives, if you like. I wear three different hats at the moment. One is as the research and innovation lead for the assistive technology program in WHO. And so the idea of standards and contexts is quite challenging, because from a global health, a rights and a well-being perspective, we're aware that a standard in one place can be very good, but in another place can be very problematic. And indeed, it can actually stop access to services. So I really like the way in which Nathan just described standards there as optimum degree of order in a given context. And I would really urge us to think about, on a global scale, the range of different sorts of contexts that are available, and therefore the range of standards that might need to be available as well. Okay, another hat is as the clinical lead for disability services in Ireland. And one of the things we're often being encouraged to do is to look at best practice. And best practice is almost always something done somewhere else. And one of the challenges is therefore trying to apply that to a different context from where the best practice has been developed. The same can apply within Ireland. For instance, you might develop a best practice in Dublin. Applying it in rural Sligo can be very different. So I'd like us again to be a wee bit more humble and to think of, you know, what's good practice, what applies well in a particular context. And we can learn a lot by looking at multiple good practices rather than, if you like, rarefying a particular type of best practice. And then finally, as the co-director of the Assisting Living and Learning Institute, sure, we want to produce outcomes, but we also have a really strong interest in the process, and particularly in the process of developing inclusivity. And Ian talked about neighbourhoods of the future, for instance, being about older people, but also people with disabilities and multi-generational people. I think that whole element of inclusion in the process of research, in action research, I noticed one of the comments in the chat saying that, you know, we're sort of drowning in reports, we need to get on and do things. Absolutely. And that's what research needs to do. It needs to get on and be part of the action and look at people's real lives as they change and evolve. So just once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present herein, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mac. In fact, the three of you, it's a very complex, large project. And indeed, we had a general meeting a month or so ago, which took 8 hours, and I don't think we covered everything. So it's a lot to take on board, but I think that you did a great job in the time that we had. There were quite a lot of comments about the profiling and a lot of interest in that. If we had more time, indeed in May last year, we did focus specifically on that side of the project, how you go about understanding the actual people involved. And this has been a crucial part of Shapes, you know, starting with the person. So we'll share some of that information, but there is a presentation on the Agile Aging Alliance website from last time specific to that. And indeed, we have people in the audience today from that particular work package. There's another question from Stuart Anderson, which I think is relevant, which is, does Shapes have a resourcing model in mind? EU health and care is hugely diverse in funding models and in conceptions of integrated care. Resourcing seems to be a major source of failure. It would be great if Shapes had ideas about this. So I thought I'd throw an easy question to you in the first instance, Mac.
Okay, well, thanks for that question. And I can see you're still traumatized from that 8-hour meeting. Sorry about that. So yeah, really important question. So I guess just to put it in perspective, what our 21 million funding for this grant does is allows us to explore ways of creating what you might consider markets that can more equitably distribute the benefits of technologies to citizens of Europe. So part of our job is to try and identify what sort of flexibility and fluidity within the markets needs to exist, so that when there's a good solution, that it can be shared on the platform and that people can use it. So at the minute, having completed just the first year of the project, do we have the answer to that question? No, but it's very much within our sights, and it will be, one of our key outputs. We have a work package around identifying that. So it's about stimulating markets, it's about identifying sources of investment, and it's about ensuring that there's sustainability in that. So we're open to suggestions in terms of good practices as well regarding that.
And there's a follow-on question from that, which actually being here today is starting to address, which is there's a general interest, and fair enough, what is the sustainability path for this project? Because as we all know, generally a EU funded project has a finite lifespan, but a lot is being invested into developing something, and I know your aspiration is that it will have a longer life, and in fact many of the partners are equally committed. What's your view on that, Mike?
Yeah, so I mean, ours is a significant project. It's part of a cluster of similar projects, and those similar projects, when you put them all together, the funding around those, I think, is around 150 million. So this, as I said, it's an innovation action. This is not about researching what would be a good sort of widget for people to use. It's about researching how are people going to use all these different technologies in an interoperable way, in a way that increases their, their quality of life, etc. Many of our partners, as you see, are SMEs. So the process of doing this research actually contributes to stimulating the market within Europe. Sure, within this cluster of projects, even with 150 million, that's not going to create the sustainability in itself. But across those projects, we probably have several hundred SMEs and larger scale industry. And that you can be assured that's very much what those people are thinking about themselves. So it is a shot in the arm to get things moving more, but it's more than a shot in the arm. It's producing some long-term capability, which will in itself sort of stimulate and sustain the market through those SMEs.
And there's a question that I've been looking to avoid, or a subject I've been looking to avoid, but it's come up. And so I think it is relevant in the context of what we're talking about now, which came from Tom Morton, which is, will the results be useful if the UK is no longer in the EU? Now, before I throw that at you, I'm going to address that, because the question has to be useful to who. And the reality is that we're not doing this just for the UK. The whole point is the whole is greater than, and should be greater than, the sum of its parts. But the purpose of this meeting today is to break down those barriers. It is to actually say, we are privileged, as if you like, the Agile Aging Alliance. We are being funded to participate in an EU project. We're one of the last UK companies to qualify for that. And it gives us a special insight. There are some really interesting learnings that are coming out of the technological innovation that is being explored by Shapes that can be applied in other territories, be that in the UK, there's nothing against it, or further afield, Australia, America, India, for example. So we have here a commitment from the pilot projects, of which Shapes is one, which is to pool resources, which is to work together, to collaborate, to test scenarios in different environments. So if something works in mainland Europe, it doesn't stop us from trialing it as part of one of the projects that you'll hear about this afternoon in the Clarion demonstrator in London and then in others. So I think it's important to stress that from a Shapes point of view, we are an opportunity, the people in this meeting who have your own interest, we are an opportunity to ensure that Shapes is not defined by the fact that it's funded by a European Commission or it's a European Commission project. And I think that that's something that you felt very strongly about, Mac.
Yeah, and if I can maybe just say, as someone myself who's both proudly British and proudly Irish, I feel that I don't want to sound in any way paternalistic to my friends there in Britain, but I think it's really important that Britain reasserts its European credentials. Britain is still in Europe. It has the status in terms of the European Commission of countries such as Norway and Switzerland. No one doubts their Europeanness. And I think it's really important that Britain feels at home, again, excuse the pun, within Europe. And that of course we have to ensure that the sort of initiatives like you're heading up through AAA in, and lots of other people are heading up, these are not about borders. They're about international ideas and international living. One of our work one of our pilot sites actually looks at mobility across countries, and while that is within Europe, it would also apply to countries outside Europe. So it sort of distresses me that when I hear people with this sense that the Great Britain has been sort of set adrift in mid-Atlantic somewhere. I think it's really important for everyone's morale to recognise that Britain remains a part of Europe. Certainly, we wish they were still within the European Commission, European Union, but they're not. But they're still, you're still our European family. You've gone all blank. That's maybe too gushy for you, Ian, was it?
It wasn't too gushy. I was just trying to decide what member of my family I would put you down to, and I would call you brother. And that's a very strong positive. But I think you're right. It's about borderless development. I mean, somebody was actually extending the question and saying, well, this is all right. What value to UK citizens? Well, the data, the knowledge that comes out of this is going to be disseminated. We are there to help that process, as are you, by coming to these type of events and more, and actually thinking about what does collaboration look like, because that's what we're actually doing now. We're running a bit late, but I think that I want to thank Evert, Jan, Sonia, and Mac. Again, I would ask everyone to applaud, but we can't. So a bit of a rah-rah for our colleagues there.